every experience that your brain has, which means you have, so like literally every memory that you recall, every emotion that you experience, every person that you meet, every scenario that you're in, is constantly molding and shaping your brain. So because of a field of research about neuroplasticity, we understand how much more flexible and impressionable the brain is throughout our lives. This may start to change. I don't even want to use the word decline, around the age of 70, where sometimes things like sequential memories can become a bit disordered, but our wisdom and judgment becomes like a superpower. So it can change towards the end of life, but really throughout most of our working life, let's say, the brain is very open to being changed by everything that it experiences. And the longer that an impression has been held in the brain, the more deeply embedded it is into our neural architecture. So particularly things that we experience from the age of 0 to 7, but also 7 to 14 and then onwards. But, those periods really, because they're the longest to go. And if you had a repeated experience or a highly emotional experience, then those are the two main reasons that things get imprinted into your brain: repetition and strong emotion. And so it's funny, I am 5.5 years older than my brother. And I was telling my psychologist friend that I had a very strong memory of speaking into my mother's belly button and then listening to see if my brother would answer me. And in my memory, that happened once, and I just remember it really strongly. But he said to me, "You must have done that many times for it, for a 5-year-old to still hold that memory." So other things like that, like the parental expectation, societal expectation, how competitive your school was, the kind of people that you hung around with, words that were used about you when you were a kid, those things, they run deep in your brain. And they, like you said, they do affect your perception of everything else that happens in your adult life. And, one of the main areas of work around that is what's called shadow work in psychology, which is the things that you perceived as a child would mean that you wouldn't be loved and looked after by your main caregivers. So those sorts of things, whether it's like, stop showing off or stop running around like that, those things get put into your shadow. Like, I mustn't talk highly of myself. I mustn't, sort of like do things at speed if other people can't keep up. Those are the things we try to hide about ourselves. And usually around the age of midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it, those things can really like come up and have to be dealt with and integrated.
Like a lot of those oppressions that we accumulated often in an unconscious state from like 0 to 7, 7 to 14, they happen in a manner where we don't fully have the memory of how they happened. And that then builds and accumulates into a stack of impressions that our subconscious holds and becomes the persona in which we look through the world. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about identity, because fundamentally we're going to continually attract what we believe we're worthy of, what we believe we deserve, which is kind of all on the bedrock of who we think we are. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about identity, the science of it, and how that's really the foundational pillar in which how we experience everything, but then, in particular, how we manifest in life.
So there's an area of research called ghosts. The original research was ghosts in the executive suite, because it was explaining how the leaders of today are affected by those childhood impressions. But my colleague at MIT, Professor Deborah Ancona, wrote a really amazing article in Harvard Business Review about ghosts in your neural architecture from your childhood and how they affect you, whatever you're doing, whoever you are. And identity is one of them. So actually the other things are the values that your family held or your social structure, when you were growing up held, boundaries that were held in your family and your social structure, secrets that were kept, roles in the family, and identification, which in childhood tends to be comments like, "Oh, you're just like your father." And so those things are quite intertwined. So for example, if you have a secret in your family, and the common examples are, someone that was an alcoholic or someone that was gay that wasn't talked about, then you start to program shame around those things. And so that affects your identity. So the secrets that were kept in your family affect your identity. The boundaries that were kept in your family. So some families have a really open house and people can just drop in and they can stay over. They can just join a meal unplanned. And some families, everything's very planned and, it has to be like invited in advance and kind of, not spontaneous. Again, those things also affect your identity because it's your ability to be flexible and spontaneous versus your, inability to function in a world where that may be happening. And roles obviously also affect your identity. So let's say now you're in the workplace and your role as a child was to be the messenger. So let's say your parents had a lot of arguments and didn't speak to each other and said things like, Andre, go and tell your mother, whatever. That's also going to play out in your adult identity. And you're absolutely correct. You mentioned a few things, but in my research, what I found is that the inability or frustration or success around manifestation always boils down to your level of deservingness of the outcome that you're looking for. So in terms of the way this works with neuroplasticity is that you have to perform a certain action in the material world to bring what you want into your life. To perform that action with confidence, you have to have a certain thought process that tells you, if I go dating, I'm going to meet someone really nice and be able to settle down and have a family. Versus, if I go dating, I'm going to meet a series of guys who are going to treat me really badly and it's going to damage my self-esteem even further. You can see the path that, those two people are going to go down. And it's the same for asking for a raise, asking for promotion, setting out to start your own business, any sort of health or fitness goals. And so behind that thought process will be a set of beliefs that may be conscious, but may be subconscious as well. So you do not even know that that's what you believe about yourself that is starting off the thought process that is either preventing you or allowing you with trust and faith, to take a healthy risk. So if you're able to dig down to that underlying belief, that's when you can do really powerful work to affect your manifestation. And whatever the particular phrase tends to be, it usually does equate to inability to manifestation is because I don't believe I deserve that thing.
The secrets, the boundaries, the roles,
values.
Yeah. So those things that we pick up because children, they don't often do what their parents say, but they become who they are inevitably. And so I'm so fascinated in the deep ways, and I know you've studied Carl Jung's work quite extensively in the process of taking our unconscious material to our conscious awareness to be able to work with these things. And I just think that's really important to get to the root of it, because then you're kind of just swimming on the surface of think better thoughts and, but like the root of it is still a rotten tree. And so you're going to kind of keep finding yourself coming back to the same experience of life, attracting the same partners. So anything you want to touch on there before I move on? Yeah,
just really to reiterate what you've said. But so in the process of neuroplasticity, the practical process, like day to day, is raising awareness of the thing that you wish to change, or, awareness around what it is that you want to attract into your life, focusing attention on opportunities to bring that into your life. Deliberate practice is the action part, which I'm really strong on. You can't just sit there and think about what you want and not do anything. And then the accountability piece. But you're absolutely right that raising from non-conscious to conscious is the absolute key. If you can't do that, you're skimming on the surface. You might be able to change a few behaviors, but you're not changing the underlying belief. So I always just say that raising awareness is 50% of that battle of change. But the process for that is bringing from non-conscious to conscious what it is that's holding you back.
Anything else you want to share on the neuroplasticity of being able to reinvent ourselves? So we might have the desire of, fill in the blank, whatever it might be, whether it's a partner, career, more money, a general sense of well-being. And yet, if we really struggle to bring the unconscious to the conscious, what are some of those tools that bring into people's actions that you found most transformative?
I want to go with a bit of just like the philosophy around it first, and then maybe get down to some tools. But so we've talked about not being aware of unconscious beliefs and trying to raise that. But the other piece that I think is really important is, you've talked about something that we desire. I actually call it magnetic desire, which is a desire that is so strong that you will keep going when it feels like nothing's changing. And, the biggest reason that people don't change is that when it gets tough, we think, oh, well, this isn't meant to be, so I'll give up and I'll move on to something else. Magnetic desire is when your head, heart, and gut, so your logic, your emotion, and your intuition are fully aligned. If any one of those things is saying, I'm not sure if that's what I really want for myself, then you can't, like, all three of them have to be aligned, and the desire has to be very strong, because it's too easy. And what I see a lot is people say that they want things like a family or a certain job or a certain amount of money because that's what their peer group are doing. And what you have to really work out is what you want for yourself, regardless of what everybody else is doing, that you really want for personal reasons, and not for what I would call the wrong reasons, which is that, materialistic reasons or peer, social, comparative reasons. Once you find something that you really want and you've got that strong desire and it's well aligned in your brain and your body, your ability to be patient, which is part of the process, will be much higher. And the reason that it's part of the process is, even if it's a psychological thing that you're changing, physical work is going on in your brain. New neurons are growing, neurons are connecting up with each other, pathways are being myelinated, which is insulating them for like faster conduction. That is hard work. You need to eat more, you need to rest a lot. It's literally physical work. And whilst that's happening, you're tired, your motivation is being challenged, but then it reaches a tipping point where you have enough neurons and a strong enough pathway that you can do the new behavior that's required to get what you want and get out of those old patterns. And then suddenly, you know that feeling, it feels like everything's fallen into place. But that can be after quite a long period of feeling like nothing's working out.
Everything's falling apart and definitely not in place.
Yeah.